Canada Emergency Response Benefit, better known as CERB, the program that has been in place since early April, putting money into the pockets of hard-hit Canadians, has been very popular across the country. We have seen nearly $44 billion in benefits paid to this point. We know that the NDP had been pushing the government to extend the program to get their support for a key spending bill this week, and the Prime Minister had already indicated an extension would come, and CTV this morning reporting that CERB will be extended through the summer. But obviously one of the big questions with all of these programs is how much does it cost? Let's get some perspective now from Yves Giroux, the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Thanks for joining us again here on BNN Bloomberg. I know we've asked you a lot about the fiscal picture. Let's start with the CERB program and what you think this potential extension through the summer means in terms of the ultimate bill for CERB.
Well, we don't know for sure what the design of the proposed extension will be, as the details have not been announced yet. But what we know is that if we were to extend the program until the end of January, which we costed a couple of days ago at the request of a Conservative MP, it would cost $58 billion. So between early June and the end of January, it's about $57 billion. It's a pretty hefty price tag, considering it's about 8 months of additional benefits. And it's also quite expensive, but on a decreasing scale as the economy opens up. So it's more expensive in the first few months of the period because there are more people still unemployed due to the various business closures, but fewer people benefiting if we were to extend into January, for example, as the economy reopens and businesses start functioning close to normal.
I guess at the end of the day, that's the challenge with the math you're trying to crunch right now, because if we were to pull back some of that aid, would that put us in a worse off situation longer term? And I guess we'll never know. We're in the moment right now. But when it comes to the CERB program and let's say its effectiveness, I mean, if you're going to look at the money being spent versus what it ultimately does to help our economy, what would you say about CERB specifically, say versus some of the other programs we've often talked about?
Well, CERB has a big advantage over employment insurance, for example, which it replaces for many of those who benefit from CERB, in that it covers self-employed individuals who are not covered by regular EI, because as self-employed, they don't pay into EI for the vast majority of them, and they also cannot draw on EI benefits given that they control their own hours. So CERB is accessible to most self-employed individuals, which is not the case of EI. So in that sense, it has a big benefit. One of the big benefits of CERB is also the flat rate it pays. And for low-income workers, it's more generous than EI would be. So it has big advantages. It also has couple of drawbacks. Notably, it's very high cost compared to EI, and it's also providing more disincentives to work because of the structure of the program. For example, the moment you earn more than $1,000 in any given month, you're technically not eligible for CERB, which provides a big disincentive to not accept work beyond that $1,000 a month threshold, so that you don't lose $2,000 in benefits. So it's an all or nothing in the case of CERB, which provides disincentives to work.
Do you think that becomes a greater concern if we can successfully reopen big parts of the economy? Because I would imagine, at least for some people, even beyond just the disincentive financially, there's just been that health risk, which has been a concern for people. But I would imagine if we are trying to get back to as best a position for the economy overall that we can be in, that there's perhaps a greater concern about the disincentive that you're talking about?
Of course, and especially considering the time of year in which we are heading into the summer. Summer doesn't last long in Canada. So if you're a low-income worker, you are faced with the choice of going back to work in an environment where COVID is still present, or stay home, work a couple of hours a week, and still get your $2,000 of benefit for July and August, for example. The choice, if you can control your hours, is pretty easy in the minds of many people, especially if you have kids at home. So the disincentives to work are real and tangible. And if you talk to anybody who has a small business or who has employees who are making close to $2,000 a month, or even those making slightly more, it's very often difficult to find workers who are willing to go back to work. My wife is a director of a big daycare center, and she's faced with these conundrums, these types of responses from a minority of her employees, but still some of her employees are making these calculations.
Okay, so you've crunched the numbers on a much longer roadmap for CERB. Give us a sense right now, because your numbers have constantly been changing on the overall fiscal picture for this year. What you're now projecting in terms of the deficit, especially based on where the CERB program could go.
Well, we will have updated numbers released on Thursday. So Thursday morning, we'll be releasing another scenario with respect to the economy and the federal deficit. But that will take into account numbers and measures that have been announced up to June 12th. So if or when the Prime Minister or ministers announce enrichments to CERB, they won't unfortunately be taken into account into that figure, but a simple math will be able to provide a very clear idea as to where things stand. But for now, we don't anticipate a major deviation from the number of $252 billion that we released at the end of April. Give or take a few $billions, but I'll be able to talk in more details about that on Thursday morning.
All right, we'll look forward to that. And as you know, we've also reported on the government's conversations around releasing an economic update at some point, possibly this summer. You had told us previously you didn't think it would be rocket science to be able to do something like that. What is your assessment right now on the reality of getting an economic update and what it would allow us to do?
Well, an update would allow us to get a very clear or a clearer sense of where the government is headed, what's the state of the public finances so far, and more importantly, whether the government has a plan going forward, and if so, what type of plan they have in mind. So an update would be the perfect opportunity for the Minister of Finance and the government in general to lay out these plans. Rocket science, it is clearly not. If it is rocket science, then kudos to the great minds in Saskatchewan and Newfoundland. They have put out a budget or an update, so maybe they're much smarter than our federal public servants and ministers. I don't think so. I think they just have the courage and they decided politically that it was a valid exercise to do. Quebec will do the same thing later this week. So if 3 provinces can release an update, a fiscal update or a mini budget or whatever the name you want to give it, I'm sure that federal civil servants and ministers can also come up with an accurate picture, as accurate as can be in the circumstances. But I'm sure that we can do it at the federal level as well if 3 provinces can do it.
Yves Giroux, thanks as always. Yves Giroux, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, joining us.